The smell of gunpowder drifted over the rolling hills long before Abigail Martin saw the flashes of musket fire. The night was lit in short, violent bursts, pale blue flames snapping against the pitch-black horizon. Somewhere beyond that ridge, men were dying for a country not yet born. Abigail wasn't supposed to be there. Women from her village were expected to keep to the shadows, mending uniforms, boiling water for the wounded, and delivering bread to soldiers who rarely looked them in the eye. But tonight, the distant sound of battle was too close to ignore, and the cold autumn wind carried with it a strange dread that made her chest feel tight. She clutched the wicker basket against her hip, the loaves inside still warm from the fire. Her shawl, thin and frayed, flapped in the wind as she trudged along the narrow trail toward the encampment. She had promised her older brother, Nathaniel, that she would bring food to the sentries posted along the ridge. It was the least she could do. Abigail had never been strong. Years of sickness had seen to that, but she had quick hands and quiet steps. In times like these, both were worth something. As she climbed the final slope, the sharp crack of a musket made her flinch. Shouts followed, hoarse, urgent voices. Then came the thunder of hooves, pounding hard against the frozen ground. Abigail froze, her breath caught in her throat. The war, which had always seemed like something distant, something for braver people, was now less than 100 yards away. A figure broke through the darkness, stumbling, not riding. A soldier, tall but clearly wounded. His blue coat torn and smeared with mud. His tricorn hat hung askew, one side of his face shadowed by the brim. He swayed as he walked, his right arm limp at his side. When his eyes found her, he stopped short, confusion flickering across his features. "You!" His voice cracked, breathless. "Hide now." Before she could respond, another musket shot rang out behind him. He staggered, dropping to one knee. Instinct overruled fear. Abigail dropped her basket and rushed forward. "Sir, you're hurt," she whispered, crouching beside him. "Captain Elias Rains," he muttered, his words clipped, his breathing shallow. "Patriot regiment. Hessians." He grimaced as a spasm of pain gripped him. "I can't stay here." Her hands trembled as she pressed against the dark stain spreading across his side. "You need a surgeon." "No time." His eyes darted toward the ridge. "They'll finish what they started." Behind them, faint but growing louder, came the sound of foreign shouts, the guttural bark of German commands. Abigail's pulse hammered in her ears. She had no rifle, no way to defend either of them. She had never even held a weapon without feeling its weight drag her arms down. "Can you walk?" she asked. His gaze locked on hers for a moment, measuring something, her fear, her resolve. Then he shook his head once. She glanced back down the trail toward her village. It was miles away, and the road would be watched. The only other way was through the woods, a maze of narrow deer paths where lantern light could not reach. She didn't think. She simply acted. "Come on," she said, slipping under his good arm and bracing herself against his weight. He was heavy, heavier than she had expected. Every step jarred her shoulder, every stumble sent pain through her lower back. But she gritted her teeth and moved forward. The captain's boots dragged over the dirt, his breath ragged in her ear. They left the open trail, slipping into the dense cover of the trees. Branches clawed at her shawl, and leaves whispered beneath their feet. Somewhere behind them, the enemy's voices grew sharper, closer. Elias stiffened, his head jerking toward the sound. "Faster," he urged. She tried. God, she tried. But her legs were already burning, and each step felt like she was dragging both of them through water. Her thin shoes slipped on damp leaves. At one point, they both nearly went down when her foot caught on a root. The captain caught himself against a tree, grimacing. "Leave me," he said through clenched teeth. Abigail's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear him. "No, you'll never make it," he insisted. "They'll kill you too." "I'd rather they kill me than find you," she snapped, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. She tightened her grip under his arm. Now move. Something in her tone silenced him. For the next few minutes, the only sounds were the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of the Hessians, and the rasp of Elias's breathing. The moon broke through the clouds briefly, casting pale light across his face. He was younger than she had thought, no more than 30, but the lines of exhaustion and pain made him look older. His jaw was set in a stubborn angle, the kind of expression that belonged to someone who had seen too much to turn back. When they reached a narrow stream, she eased him down onto a moss-covered rock. "Rest," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, keep going. You won't go anywhere if you collapse," she countered. She pulled her shawl tight around him, ignoring the cold seeping into her own skin. "Just a moment, please." His eyes searched hers again, softer this time, as if trying to reconcile the frail girl before him with the stubborn will that had dragged him this far. "You're not a soldier," he murmured. "No," she said, "but I can carry a man through the night if I have to." Somewhere in the darkness, a twig snapped. Both of them froze. The shouts were close now, too close. Abigail's stomach knotted. She knew the next hour would decide everything, whether they would make it to safety, or whether their bodies would be found by dawn. She rose, slid her arm under his again and whispered, "We move now." The forest seemed to close in around them as Abigail and Captain Rains pushed forward. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, the moonlight barely able to pierce the canopy above. Every rustle, every snap of a branch felt like a warning. Abigail's arm ached from supporting his weight, but she didn't dare slow down. The enemy's voices were no longer faint, they echoed through the hollow woods like hunting hounds closing in on their prey. "Left," Elias whispered, nodding toward a narrow game trail that sloped downward. "It'll take us to the creek bed." She adjusted her grip, guiding him down the uneven path. The mud was slick, and more than once, her shoes nearly slid out from under her. But the captain's suggestion made sense. Flowing water could mask their sounds, maybe even hide their tracks. When they reached the shallow creek, Abigail crouched to help him step in. The icy water bit at her ankles, but she welcomed it. It might numb the burning in her legs. They moved along the winding stream, letting the current swallow their footsteps. Behind them, the shouts grew more scattered, punctuated by the occasional musket shot. The search party was spreading out. After several minutes, Elias stumbled, his knees buckling. Abigail caught him with all the strength she had left, her heart lurching at the sound of his labored breathing. His head lolled forward. "You're burning up," she whispered, touching his forehead. "Fever." The wound was bad, worse than she'd realized. "We can't keep this pace." He shook his head weakly. "If we stop, they'll find us." She scanned their surroundings, eyes searching for anything, a hollow, a thicket, where they could rest unseen. That's when she spotted it. A large fallen oak, its roots ripped from the earth, creating a dark cavity beneath. It wasn't much, but it might buy them a little time. "Come on," she urged, steering him toward the tree. They crawled into the space, the damp earth pressing against their backs. Abigail pulled her shawl over the captain again and listened. The forest came alive with the sound of boots splashing through the creek. Two men's voices, speaking in clipped German, drew closer. Abigail's stomach tightened as they stopped just a few yards away. She held her breath, her hand instinctively covering Elias's mouth. She could feel his rapid heartbeat under her palm. The soldiers paused, one of them muttering something about tracks. The other replied with a dismissive grunt. Then the sound of their footsteps faded up the creek. Abigail didn't move until the silence stretched long and heavy. Only then did she pull her hand away. "That was close," Elias murmured, his voice rough. "You need a surgeon," she said again, more firmly this time. "If we keep going like this, you won't make it to morning." His eyes met hers, steady despite the pain. "There's a Patriot safe house, 3 miles west. If we can reach it, I'll live." 3 miles. In her current state it felt like 30. But she nodded. "Then we go west." They crawled from under the tree, the night air colder now. Abigail's legs trembled, but she pulled him to his feet. Step by step, they vanished deeper into the woods, the shadow of the fallen oak swallowing the place where they had hidden. The forest thinned as the night wore on, but the cold only deepened. Abigail's breath came in sharp, frosted puffs, her fingers stiff from the chill. She kept her shoulder under Elias's arm, bracing him with each uneven step. His weight was heavier now, his head sometimes dropping forward as though he might lose consciousness. The distant bay of a hound carried on the wind. Abigail froze, listening. Another bay followed, closer. Her stomach sank. The Hessians had unleashed dogs. "We need to move faster," she whispered. Elias's voice was weak but steady. "There's a clearing ahead. We'll see the North Star from there. Keep west." Her legs burned, but she obeyed. They pushed through a tangle of underbrush until the trees opened onto a wide meadow dusted with frost. Above, the stars gleamed sharp and cold, the sky like black glass. Elias tilted his head, scanning until his gaze fixed on a single bright point. "There," he said, lifting a trembling hand. 3 miles in that direction." Abigail swallowed hard. "Then we keep going." But crossing the meadow meant exposure. Anyone scanning with a lantern could spot them instantly. She looked back at the dark tree line, listening to the faint, steady thud of approaching paws. No choice. They had to risk it. They moved quickly across the open ground, Elias leaning heavily on her. Her eyes flicked constantly between the sky and the shadowy edges of the field. Halfway across, Elias faltered, his knees buckling. Abigail dropped with him to her knees, trying to shield his body from view. "Get up," she urged. "Just a little further." His breathing was ragged. "I can't." "Yes, you can," she said fiercely. "Because I'm not dragging you through all this just to watch you die here." For a moment, he stared at her, something like a faint smile ghosting his lips. Then, with a deep breath, he forced himself upright. They reached the far side of the meadow, plunging back into the shelter of the woods. The sound of the hounds was louder now, close enough to make Abigail's chest tighten with panic. She scanned the forest and spotted a narrow ravine ahead, its sides steep and lined with rocks. "Down there," she said, guiding him toward it. The descent was treacherous, the loose stones shifting under their boots. Twice, Abigail nearly fell, but Elias caught her arm despite his own weakness. At the bottom, a small stream trickled over rocks, its soft gurgle masking their steps. They followed the water until a faint glow appeared through the trees ahead. Abigail's heart leapt. A cabin, small, with smoke curling from its chimney. "That's it," Elias breathed. "Safe house." They approached cautiously, and she rapped lightly on the door. A moment later, an older man with a long gray beard cracked it open, his eyes narrowing. "Password?" he asked in a low voice. Elias whispered something Abigail couldn't hear, and the man's expression softened. He opened the door fully, ushering them inside. Warmth hit her like a wave. For the first time all night, Abigail allowed herself to hope. The door shut behind them with a solid thud, shutting out the wind and the distant baying of hounds. The cabin smelled of burning oak and herbs. A single lantern cast a warm, golden light across the small room, where a cot sat against the far wall and shelves of jars lined the space. "Lay him there," the old man said, pointing to the cot. Abigail guided Elias over, lowering him carefully onto the thin mattress. His face was pale, his lips tinged blue. She removed her shawl and tucked it around him before stepping back. The man moved quickly, fetching a basin of hot water and clean cloths. "Name's Samuel. You brought him a long way, girl." "He wouldn't have made it without help," she replied, her voice low. Samuel shot her a quick, knowing glance. "You're no soldier, but you've done a soldier's work tonight." Elias tried to speak, but Samuel pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Save your strength, Captain." He began cleaning the wound, his hands steady despite the deep gash in Elias's side. Bullet missed the vitals, thank God, but infection's already setting in. "We'll keep you alive." Abigail stayed near, watching the flicker of the lantern light over Elias's face. His eyes met hers briefly, gratitude shining there, though he said nothing. It was enough. Outside, the wind howled against the walls, rattling the shutters. Samuel worked in silence, his focus unwavering. Abigail fetched more water, her hands trembling, not from fear this time, but from the release of hours of tension. They were safe for now. When the wound was cleaned and bound, Samuel gave Elias a small measure of brandy to dull the pain. The captain drank it slowly, his eyes half-lidded. "You should rest too," Samuel told Abigail. "There's a blanket by the hearth." She shook her head. "I'll stay with him until morning." Samuel studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod and busied himself with his shelves. Hours passed, marked only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional groan from the timbers in the wind. Abigail dozed in a chair beside the cot, waking each time Elias stirred. Once, in the deepest part of the night, his hand reached for hers. She took it without hesitation. "You didn't have to," he murmured. "Yes, I did," she whispered back. By the time pale light seeped through the shutters, the fever had begun to break. Samuel checked the bandages and gave a satisfied grunt. "He'll live. Needs rest, but he'll live." Elias looked at her then, more awake now, his voice stronger. "You carried me through the night, Abigail Martin. I won't forget it." She felt heat rise to her cheeks but only nodded. Outside the world was still at war, but in that small cabin the fight was over, for now. The sun rose over the frost-covered meadow, and Abigail stepped outside to breathe the cold morning air. She had never fired a rifle, never charged into battle. Yet she had carried a man's life through the dark and into the dawn. And sometimes she realized that was enough to change everything.